إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونؤمن به ونتوكل عليه ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهد الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلله فلا هادي له ونشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له ونشهد أن سيدنا وحبيبنا ومولانا محمدا عبده ورسوله. قال الله تعالى في كتابه الكريم بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم وإذ يمكر بك الذين كفروا ليثبتوك أو يقتلوك أو يخرجوك ويمكرون ويمكر الله والله خير الماكرين. صدق الله العظيم. فقال النبي الكريم صلى الله تعالى عليه وسلم إن الإسلام بدأ غريبا وسيعود غريبا فطوبى للغرباء أو كما قال عليه الصلاة والسلام. أما بعد. Last Friday was the first Jumu'ah of the month of Muharram. And if most of us have our dates right in our calendars, we know the order of the months. We know that Muharram is the beginning of the new Islamic year. It is the year 1446 according to what we call the Hijri calendar at this point. So for those of you who didn't celebrate the new year, I'm sure there's still some fireworks that are available from July 4th. But even still, to understand the significance of being in a new year, in the Islamic calendar, as we call it, we should at first also understand what the history of our calendar is. What does it begin with? How does it start? What is the history of what led to us having our own calendar that 1,446 years later is still continuing on? And the calendar began, as the name implies, with the Hijrah of the Prophet ﷺ and the companions to the city of Medina. Specifically the Prophet ﷺ, but as a whole, the entirety of the Muslims. And the Prophet ﷺ in this very beginning, the beginning time of his hijrah, we have to understand the calendar didn't begin when the message came. When Jibreel a.s. came to the Prophet ﷺ and said, Iqra, and the Prophet ﷺ said, Ma ana biqari. That Jibreel a.s. said, read. He said, I can't read. This is not when the calendar begins. It is a misconception for some people. But rather the calendar began over a decade after that happened. Over a decade after the message began. And the Prophet ﷺ, when he performed his hijrah, the Quraysh had a habit. They would change months around. They would move dates around to make it so that it wasn't a sanctified month, so that they could do the things that they wanted. Imagine for yourself that Ramadan is coming up and everybody starts thinking, man, you know what? It's going to be hard to fast in the summertime. Let's just move Ramadan to December. This is what the Quraysh were effectively doing. They were changing things around willy-nilly however they wanted, and they really had no regard. So the calendar for us then begins with the Prophet ﷺ, the first of Muharram being when the Prophet ﷺ made his hijrah. And from there on, that was the beginning. The very first year of this hijrah was when the Prophet ﷺ performed the actual action. What are lessons from this? Because you have to understand that the hijrah itself is a monumental moment in the life, in the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ. Rasulullah ﷺ, again, for context, for your own self, imagine and understand what he's going through. He has lived here for 50 plus years in the city of Mecca. He was not only born here, but he grew up here. He had his mother and his father here in this town. His wife is buried here. All his children are born here. This, in every way, shape, and form, is his home. And of course, the greatest honor of the city of Mecca is that it is the place of the Kaaba. So for the Prophet ﷺ to leave this place, it's not a small thing. It was a monumental moment. But that journey then also was a transformative journey. There are many lessons from this hijrah that began this new calendar for us that we can take. And the Prophet ﷺ first commanded his followers to go to the city of Medina. After concluding the pledge of Aqaba, the second one, the Prophet ﷺ, he tells his followers to begin their migration slowly. And people start to leave. And all of a sudden, if you can imagine that you have a town that has people living in it, different areas, different quarters, all of a sudden it started to be very empty. It started getting quieter. And what happens is that the Muslims are leaving en masse to head to the city of Yathrib. And they're not doing it like we do. They aren't packing up U-Hauls with all the things that they have. They're not putting all their money in the account and making sure the bank in Medina is also accessible. They are leaving as much, they are taking only as much as they can carry and leaving pretty much everything behind. Abdurrahman ibn Auf radiallahu anh, famously, he had already become a kingpin of the business market, of the business world in Mecca. He was somebody who was, by our standards, a million to a billionaire. And he, in this time, in spite of being somebody who was so powerful and so wealthy, had to leave everything behind to migrate to the city of Medina, to follow what he believed in the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And different followers had different stories. One of the more famous ones is Umar radiallahu anh. Because Umar radiallahu anh was somebody who pulled no punches. He was somebody who didn't take anything lying down. He was somebody who was very rough and tough. If you were going to try to mess with Umar radiallahu anh, he was going to make sure that you understood it was not going to be an easy task. Umar radiallahu anh, for his hijrah, he goes to the Kaaba and he prays 2 rak'at. He just stands there and then he stands up and looks around at the Quraysh. And he says, Ya ma'shar al-Quraysh, O you people of Quraysh, I want you to know something. As of this moment, I am leaving this town. I am leaving your city and I am going to the city of Medina. And he says something, if you reflect on it, it's funny. Because he says, if any of you wishes to widow your wives, orphan your children, or bereave their mother, leave their mother without a child, then follow me. What's he saying? If you follow me, you have a death wish. This is who Umar radiallahu anh was. And can you guess how many people followed him? It's a big 0. Umar radiallahu anh was one of the earlier people to leave, but the Prophet ﷺ himself did not leave. The Prophet ﷺ remained back. As many companions left and headed to the city, he remained behind waiting for a particular thing. Permission from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is a small thing for us, but if you understand what a prophet's responsibility is, then this is something that's actually very important. In the story of Yunus alayhi salam, Yunus ibn Matta alayhi salam, the prophet who was sent to the people of Nineveh, he went through a whole ordeal simply because he did not wait for Allah's permission before leaving his people. So the Prophet ﷺ is waiting for Allah's permission, and he tells Abu Bakr radiallahu anh in particular, just wait, I have hope that Allah will give me permission soon. And Abu Bakr radiallahu anh understood that the Prophet ﷺ wanted him to migrate with him, so he stayed behind as well. And when the time finally came, it was high drama. It wasn't just a quick, okay, I'm heading out, guys, see you later. It was high drama because it all corresponded with many events. First, the Prophet ﷺ, when he received this permission to migrate, it coincided with a meeting that the Quraysh had, where they said that we need to all figure out a plan because all these Muslims are leaving, and if they all leave, 2 things are going to happen. Number 1, people are going to talk about us and say, how could you have let all these people leave your town? People are going to talk bad about us. And secondly, they had another concern. The city of Medina, or the city of Yathrib at that time, was simply about northwest of the city of Mecca. And it coincided with their typical trade routes. So if they were taking caravans, then they would pass by the city of Yathrib. And they knew that if the Muslims were encamped in this new city, it would put their caravans at risk. So they had a commercial concern as well. And all of them are getting riled up and getting lathered up and stirred and worried and angry until Abu Jahl himself gives some recommendations. He says, we have to do something very particular. We cannot expel him. We can't imprison him because he'll become a martyr. We need to kill him. We need to kill him. And so the Quraysh all look at him and say, well, yeah, it's easy for you to say that, but the Arab tribes had a custom. If you killed someone from their tribe, it would either mean war or you'd have to pay a huge penalty. So Abu Jahl says, I got another plan for that. We'll have 10 people or more come together and everybody will plunge their swords into Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam at the same time. And that way they won't be able to say, oh, this family was at fault or that family. It'll have to be spread. We'll just have to make a settlement. And we'll happily pay any settlement. So they concoct this plan. And the Prophet ﷺ in the meantime is with Abu Bakr radiallahu anh. He tells him it's time for us to go. And Abu Bakr radiallahu anh, he has already prepared for this for weeks in advance. And so he immediately puts his plan into motion. Things start turning, the wheels are turning. The Prophet ﷺ goes to Ali radiallahu anh and he says, Ali, I have many trusts. And this is, subhanAllah, one of the great ironies of the Quraysh, is that in spite of their position that he was a liar, in spite of their position that he was a magician, they were still trusting him with their belongings. Because they said, well, yeah, he's a liar on this, but he's still Sadiqul Ameen. He's still the truthful one. They couldn't wrap their minds around it, and yet still trusting him with their goods. So the Prophet ﷺ goes to Ali radiallahu anh, he says, listen, Ali, I want you to take care of these and give these back to every person who it belongs to. And here's another thing, you're going to sleep in my bed tonight. You are going to sleep in my bed, because Ali radiallahu anh resembled the Prophet ﷺ. So Ali radiallahu anh, he says, of course, Ya Rasulullah, I'll do what you need. He lays down in the bed of the Prophet ﷺ. The Quraysh have gathered around the house of the Prophet ﷺ. They're peeking into his home and they're seeing somebody sleeping. They're thinking it's him. And they say, we're going to wait until he comes out in the morning. He usually goes to the haram to pray. We're going to wait. We're going to strike him then. But they don't know it's Ali radiallahu anh. And more importantly, while they're sitting there, directly in front of them, the Prophet ﷺ passes by. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, protecting His Prophet ﷺ, covers their eyes from seeing him. When the Prophet ﷺ goes to Abu Bakr, they head out from the city of Mecca. And if you think about where the city of Medina is, like I said, it's northwest, slightly west of Mecca. So where are you going to go? What direction? You're naturally going to go northwest. But what happens instead? When the Quraysh realize that the Prophet ﷺ has escaped and they realize that he's no longer here, they immediately set the alarm. And they send people out and they say, we will give you 100 red camels if you capture him. And again, for context, 100 red camels, it sounds like some meaningless amount. But to understand it in our context, again, it's as if someone's saying there's a bounty on this man for $10 million. You will be richer than you can know what to do with if you just catch this man for us. So everybody sets out, because naturally the pathway is northwest. Yathrib is northwest. Let's go this way. But the Prophet ﷺ and Abu Bakr radiallahu anh had a different plan. They go southwest. They go southeast towards a mountain called Mount Thawr, Jabal Thawr. When they arrive at Jabal Thawr, they camp inside of a cave in the mountain. And they're hiding there and waiting. And a few people from Quraysh had a thought, maybe they're going to try and trick us. Maybe they're going to try and go this other direction. So some people headed over to Thawr. And the Prophet ﷺ and Abu Bakr are in this area, and they know that if this person just kind of looks around, they're going to see them. If they move slightly in the wrong direction. And in this, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sends, of all things, a spider that designs its web around the entrance where the Prophet ﷺ and Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu were. And this web is there, so when these people of Quraysh come through, they're saying, no, there's no way he could be here because this web is intact. They would have had to break it down. They're not here. And they leave. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks of this in the Quran. وَإِذْ هُمَا فِي الْغَارِ. When the two of them were in the cave, and he said, لَا تَحْزَنْ. One of them said, don't grieve. إِنَّ اللَّهَ مَعَنَا. Allah is with us. The Prophet ﷺ and Abu Bakr, once they're safe from this, they head out and go northwest now. But all the people searching for them, all the bounty hunters are in front of them. And they take a longer route with a guide who is familiar with the more arid parts of the desert, Abdullah ibn Urayqit, who's not Muslim at this time. They go with this guide, and as they're heading out, they find a woman who is camped out. She's a Bedouin woman. And she has a herd of animals, and of course they're thirsty, they're hungry. And the Prophet ﷺ, he comes to her and he politely asks, would you mind if we milk from your animal? If we took some milk, she says, you can try. But she has no milk. There's nothing here. It's dry. So the Prophet ﷺ goes to the animal, says, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. And he begins to milk the animal. Milk gushes and flows out from his barakah, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And as he does so, Ma'bad, this woman who's watching, she's astounded. She said, it was dry 10 minutes ago. I just tried this. How are you doing this? She's astounded. And the Prophet ﷺ Again, think about this. He's been traveling through the desert for days. He's tired, he's hungry, he's thirsty. When he takes the first bowl, he doesn't take it and gulp it himself. He hands it to her and offering it to her. This is your animal. This is your milk. Please take from it first. Then the Prophet ﷺ himself drinks from this. And they drink to their fill until they leave. And Ma'bad radiallahu anha later accepts Islam, but she also composes beautiful poetry about Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam that we still know today. Not long after, as the Prophet ﷺ and Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu are heading still towards Medina, it's not a quick journey when you're on an animal or on foot. They're heading northward, and a man comes rushing behind them on his animal. A man by the name of Suraqah ibn Malik. And Suraqah, he sees the Prophet ﷺ. He was an expert tracker. And when he sees the Prophet ﷺ, he knows that he's struck it gold. He struck gold. He knows that he's about to be rich. Brothers, scoot up, please. Fill in the gaps in front of you. There's people still in the back who are standing. Any gaps you see in front of you. Suraqah knows that he has struck it big. And he starts rushing. He gives the reins of his animals a strong lash. And the animal will not move any further. He says, it was as if the feet of my horse became implanted into the ground. And he says, I tried and I tried and I tried, and the animal would not move in spite of everything I tried. And the Prophet ﷺ heard this behind him. And he turned and he saw that there was a man who was trying to get after them, but the horse would not go. So what does the Prophet ﷺ turn around and say? He says, Ya Suraqah, knowing the name of this man. He says, Ya Suraqah, would you not be happy to know that one day you will wear the bracelets of the ruler of Persia? And Suraqah, hearing this, he says, what? Because in this moment, he's realized that he cannot get this man. This man is protected by something that he cannot understand. And he realized that he's going to have to just accept this. And there's two ways you can do it. You can accept it and be upset about it, or you can accept it and say, you know what, I'm going to make the best of this. And the Prophet ﷺ guides him towards that better path. And he says, one day you will wear the bracelets of the ruler of Persia. And then he says, La ilaha illallah, ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa annaka rasulullah. He accepts Islam in that moment, and he rushes back. And as he's going that way, he sees other riders coming to try to find the Prophet ﷺ, and he says, there's nothing this way, just go another route, there's nobody here. Again, confounding these efforts. And finally, the Prophet ﷺ and Abu Bakr radiallahu anh, they make it. Of course, the journey is even longer than what I can talk about in a single khutbah, but they finally make it to the city of Yathrib. And the children are so happy, excited to see their Prophet. They're singing, Tala al-Badru alayna. The people of Medina are excited and happy because this is not only a fresh start for the Prophet ﷺ, but it was a fresh start for the city of Yathrib. A fresh start for the people who had lived there, the Aws and the Khazraj tribes who had lived there for generations, fighting one another. Constantly in war and battle and attrition, having these engagements where people died for no reason until the Prophet ﷺ came. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions this in the Quran. He says, وَاعْتَصِمُوا بِحَبْلِ اللَّهِ جَمِيعًا وَلَا تَفَرَّقُوا. Hold fast to the rope of Allah and don't separate. وَاذْكُرُوا نِعْمَةَ اللَّهِ عَلَيْكُمْ إِذْ كُنْتُمْ أَعْدَاءً فَأَلَّفَ بَيْنَ قُلُوبِكُمْ. Remember when you were enemies and Allah brought your hearts together. You were on the pit of hellfire. You were on the edge of the pit of hellfire, and He brought you back from this. It was a fresh start, not only for the Prophet ﷺ, not only for the calendar, but it was a fresh start for Islam and its Muslims. And that journey is why today, some 7,000 to 8,000 miles away from that place, we can sit here today saying the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Saying, Qala Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, that the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said. Because that journey, that new beginning for this calendar, that is what opened the doors for so much benefit, for so much barakah, and for Islam to take its place as not an Arab religion, but a a religion for all mankind. A deen, a millah, a path that is the path of our father Ibrahim alayhi salam. All this we can take just from one simple fact, that it is Muharram and that it is a new year for us. A new year that began with this journey. As we reflect on this, ask yourself where, as you begin this new year, 1,445 years later, ask yourself, what is it that is a fresh start for me in this new year? We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to shine His mercy on us. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم ولسائر المسلمين فأستغفروه إنه هو الغفور الرحيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد المرسلين سيدنا ونبينا محمد وآله وصحبه وسلم أما بعد. Brothers and sisters, today I leave you with a few things to think about, to reflect on. And I hope in light of it being a new year, in light of it being a new time, even if we don't keep our calendars, chances are you're not setting your calendar to a meeting for the 12th of Muharram or going and saying we're going to do this on the 7th of Dhul Hijjah. But we should at least know our history. And we should know our calendar and we should know our dates. And in being in a new year is important for us to take some things for reflection. Thinking about this journey of the Prophet ﷺ, this hijrah. The first thing that we can reflect on is in times of crisis, ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's the first thing, obviously. But also use the resources that are available to you. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has not left us penniless. He has not left us in a place where we're constantly begging other people. He has blessed us with so much, a beautiful masjid, homes that we can live in, communities that we can come to. And we have to be able to utilize those resources. You have a bank account with money, you don't have to just use it for donations. There's so many things. The Prophet ﷺ said, إِنَّ اللَّهَ يُحِبَّ أَن يَرَى أَثَرَ نِعْمَتِي عَلَى عَبْدِي. Allah loves to see the results of His blessings on His servants. If you have the money for it, it's okay to wear nice clothes. Don't be excessive, but it's okay to wear nice clothes. It's okay to have a nice car. It's okay to have a nice home. These are not wrong. But at the same time, we should make sure that all the resources we have, we utilize. Umar radiallahu anh was someone who was so strong. He was powerful in not just his strength and who he was physically, but also in his words. And he used that. Before he made his hijrah, he made it clear to the Quraysh, if you follow me, it will not end well for you. And utilizing his words and his physical strength, he was able to then protect himself and protect his family. Use those resources that we have. Ali radiallahu anhu was a brave man. To lay in a bed where people are planning to kill the person who lays in this bed every night. Takes bravery. And Ali radiallahu anhu utilized that to stay and be in this place, to sacrifice for the Prophet ﷺ. And then he walked on foot to the city of Yathrib. His feet were covered in sores and blisters when he got there. He used what he had. And the Prophet ﷺ kept Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu close to him. He knew that he would take care of things. He knew that he was a planner. He knew that he was somebody who was always prepared, and he kept him close, of course, and he's his best friend. He is someone who had grown up with the Prophet ﷺ. And he used that. The second lesson I leave you with is don't discount anyone. Ma'bad radiallahu anha was just a Bedouin woman. What need did the Prophet ﷺ have to be good to her, to treat her well? For all intents and purposes, because she was by herself, he could have overpowered her and just taken what he wanted. It was two men versus a single woman. But the Prophet ﷺ, one, was not that kind of man. And number two, he always had a level of sincerity and honesty and character that he kept with all people. Even a woman who was helpless against him, he showed her kindness and the best of character. You may think to yourself, this person's not worth anything. This person isn't that, or they're not this. But today, 1446 years later, we still read Ma'bad's poetry. It's profound. Don't discount anyone to think that they're below you, beneath you. There is no such thing. And lastly, when you are in difficulty, utilize, after asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, utilize the brothers and the sisters that Allah has put in your life as your community, as your ummah. In order to utilize them, there's a caveat. You can't just simply go and say, hey, can you help me with this or do this? Because most people probably are going to say no. Should they say yes, we can talk about ideals, but the reality is most of them will say no. But the way that we are able to utilize our brothers and sisters to help us to be able to use them in goodness, to give them benefit and us benefit, is by being a part of our communities, by engaging with our communities, being involved with our communities, not simply coming for salah, leaving, and that's it. We have to be able to do more than that. We have to be able to stay engaged and stay involved, be a part of the community, and more importantly then be a part of our brothers and our sisters. Be connected to our brothers and our sisters. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to forgive us for all of our shortcomings. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to unite our hearts as an ummah. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make this new year the best year of our lives until the next. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد كما صليت على ابراهيم وعلى ال ابراهيم انك حميد مجيد. اللهم بارك على محمد وعلى محمد كما باركت على ابراهيم وعلى ال ابراهيم انك حميد مجيد. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. ربنا ظلمنا انفسنا وان لم تغفر لنا وترحمنا لنكونن من الخاسرين. ربنا تقبل منا انك انت السميع العليم وتب علينا يا مولانا انك انت التواب الرحيم. عباد الله ان الله يأمر بالعدل والإحسان وإيتاء ذي القربى وينهى عن الفحشاء والمنكر والبغي يعظكم لعلكم تذكرون. اذكروا الله العظيم يذكركم واشكروه يزدكم واستغفروه يغفر لكم واتقوا يجعل لكم من أمكم مخرجا. أقيموا الصلاة. The room is open in the back. Fill in over there as well.